Hey everyone, welcome to a really special episode of the Atlas podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to tackle the most pressing challenges of this decade. That's a big topic to talk about. So we're bringing on a heavy hitter here, the government affairs lead at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the World Economic Forum, Mr. Loren Newman. And I'm also joined by Jean Fowl, who is also a co-founder of Atlas and also get links. So he's going to chime in whenever needed, and I guess ask some questions in areas that I've overlooked. So thank you so much for being here, Loren.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Joanna. It's sort of a pleasure to be here and to join you guys virtually. I apologize again for the roosters that you might hear in the background.
I think they're going to be a great addition to the podcast. Keep the listeners awake too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So let's begin with introduction of yourself and what have you been working on recently?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Joanna and I actually met through a mutual friend when I was working for Alibaba in China, reaching out to entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia and sort of sharing some of the lessons learned and the best practices from Alibaba's experience in China and trying to sort of figure out where that's relevant. But I've since moved on to the World Economic Forum, and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is really an effort on the part of this larger organization, the World Economic Forum. It's an effort to take these really big, thorny technology questions and oftentimes challenges in countries and try, do what we can to make them better. So I mean, that takes a lot of different forms, and I'm happy to sort of talk about all the different ways that we work with governments and entrepreneurs and civil society to sort of help square the circle and get everyone on the same page.
Okay, sure. Let's start off with what are the challenges right now that you've been tackling?
So we focus primarily on four technology subject matter areas in the C4IR. We look at blockchain, data policy, AI, and IoT. And really it's sort of, addressing the issue that I think governments understand by and large that these are, impressive, important, disruptive new technologies. But in a lot of cases, I think are at a loss for how should we regulate them. I think, colloquially, I kind of like to say that on one hand, we want the 300,000% growth that AI challenge that AI promises, but we don't want to kill people with robots. So there's going to be some middle ground between these two kind of dystopian outcomes, and I think governments are very attuned to that. But maybe I think what's more relevant here is I think for entrepreneurs who are doing exciting and disruptive things, I think it's one thing, and this is sort of the adage of Silicon Valley over the past 20, 30 years, is move fast and break things. And I think more and more entrepreneurs are discovering that if you do that, you get one very strong counter reaction from governments and regulators. Whereas I think if you bring them into the conversation and help them explain, or rather help them understand what you're doing, understand the technology that you've developed or that you're using, that you can oftentimes partner with these governments, or at least have them be a tool or a way of implementing the technology and helping to spread the technology that you're developing, and not trying to sort of kill you at every turn. And that's something that we really sort of focus on, is how do we best integrate, or how do we best sort of set the playing field between all of these private sector companies that are developing new and exciting things, and governments that want obviously that growth, they want the new opportunities, but they don't want the risks. And so that's really sort of the core of what we're trying to do at the center.
Yeah, and I've been really amazed with you, Loren, because to be honest, you're representing one of these movements of young people working in the technology world who now start to consciously evolve towards the greater good, right? So moving from Alibaba to a government purpose organization is one of the things that I think we will see a lot in the next coming years, and partially as the stakes of the fourth industrial revolution and its implication to how our life will changes, you mentioned with AI and other things, will be more and more controversial and more related to ethical and moral questions, right? So this is just one of the people you could meet who come from the tech world and going to the government world. But I believe the tech is spreading everywhere, and as its implication is taking more and more importance in our daily lives, we will see more and more people like you, Loren. So yeah, this is very exciting, and I would like to also know what is cooking up right up there in the government that maybe we don't know, and we just learned from Biden election last month that the US is going back into the Paris Agreement, right? So, and the fourth industrial revolution is also led by the energy revolution and other green tech revolution. So maybe you can tell us about that. What's cooking up in the government in terms of those green tech?
Sure. Joanne, you're too kind. I mean, I think that, but I do agree that, I mean, this is something that we're going to see impacting our lives, especially as younger people, and not as a young person anymore. Maybe younger, I'll give myself that. You know, to your question about, you know, what the government's cooking up, one thing that I'm really excited about is this push towards something called agile governance. And this is, you know, I think in the tech space, this is sort of a foregone conclusion about how you can organize your team and develop, you know, say a product. But I think governments are looking at this and seeing the results from entrepreneurs and seeing the results from all of these companies that move, honestly, a lot faster than your typical government. And they're saying, how can we do that too, right? If we're trying to keep up and regulate technology that's moving at this ever increasing pace, how do we, you know, change our own processes? And so there are, actually, we just launched at the forum, we launched the Agile Nations group, which is a group of 7 countries that are committed to saying, you know, we want to get better in this. We, you know, we're here to share best practices. We're here to sort of tell our other member nations, like, where we did a really good job, where we messed up, and also to invite people from, you know, the very tech companies they're trying to regulate into the fold and say, how can we do this better? And there's a lot of different sort of examples of that. But I think that government is sort of finally getting the message that that there are better and more agile ways to do their jobs and to sort of meet the challenge. So that's exciting. And I think you can really apply that in whether it's in a kind of strictly tech way, like, you know, how do you regulate the applications of blockchain, or if it's in, you know, how do we think about the Paris Climate Accord, and because I think that, you know, government is full of people who approach problems in different ways, and that's kind of part of the you know, the glorious sausage making process, is trying to get all of those different people who have different views of the world, but also importantly different views on how we should fix things. How do we get them all to work together? And I think that a lot of these new frameworks, and whether those are sandboxes where people with great ideas for carbon credits, or, you know, these other sort of ideas that have come out of the Paris Climate Accords, ways for them to sort of demo or pilot, you know, the intervention or the policy change that they're describing or that they're advocating for, and then governments can sort of see, oh, well, in this limited case it worked, or in this limited case it was a huge disaster. Let's either promote it on one hand, or, you know, kill it in the cradle on the other. And that's I think a big change, one that sounds sort of benign and obvious to the sort of the tech side of things, but that's something that's a big change for governments by and large.
Right. Well, I mean, the fact that governments just now are talking about agile kind of proves the point of how slow they are to adapting. So,
Sure.
just in your view there, how do you think governments will be able to adapt to the fast pace of technology and innovation here in terms of regulation or ensuring positive benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I think that governments, and obviously, I mean, I use governments kind of as a general term, and there are governments who are much better and worse at this, you know, collectively. But I think traditionally, I mean, if you think about regulation, I mean, they were regulating industries that didn't change very quickly, whether that's like auto manufacturing or, you know, the use of a plow, or, you know, sort of, you know, traditional, maybe second and third industrial revolution technologies. And I think, you know, as you have governments looking at the fourth industrial revolution, they say, or at least what what I think it's my job and other people who are in this industry to say is we can't regulate these new technologies in the same way. Like government, I think, is very used to coming out and saying, okay, we have some experts within the government who purport to understand this technology, and we're just going to listen to them, or even worse, we're just going to make regulations based on what we think is going on, and then we'll try it out, and maybe all the companies in the space blossom, and maybe they all die, and then in 10 years we'll revisit this question. And I think that's sort of a losing proposition, especially as we move into this new and exciting time. One thing that it reminds me of is back in the early days of automobiles. Actually, this was the case in the United Kingdom, and maybe people, your listeners have heard this story. But the United Kingdom invented one of the first industrial, internal combustion engines. But then they were really concerned about the effect that this new machine would have on the horse industry. So the husbandry, and then the stable boys, and the people who were selling hay, and blacksmiths for the horseshoes and so forth. So they said, okay, you can have your car, but you need to have 3 people to operate the car at all times. You need to have one person driving, one person observing the driver, and then a third person walking in front of the car holding a red flag at all times. Maximum speed limit 3 miles an hour in the city, 5 miles an hour in the countryside. And it is sort of built out of this, the government saying, okay, we understand the problem. We're gonna solve this. That way you can have your car, but we can also have horses, and everyone will be happy. But of course, what happened is that innovation in that field, because nobody wanted to have like 3 people and drive at 5 miles an hour through a countryside. All of the innovation moved to other countries, and right. By the time that the UK had removed those regulations, they were far behind. And that problem is even worse today.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, that almost killed innovation in England in terms of the auto industry. So could you talk a little bit about, let's say, some successful case studies of governments, getting the regulation right and are able to foster innovation in their countries, and maybe some examples where there's a lot of room for improvement that we might go down this, flag waving automobile path?
Totally. One great example is the government of Rwanda and the Civil Aviation Authority there. This is something that is sort of a well-worn example for us at the center, but it's a case where Rwanda is a country with a lot of rural population where the roads are few and far between, and so they were having this problem where the trauma centers that treat either victims of injury or pregnant women in the country are having a hard time supplying the amount of blood that was necessary to these trauma victims. So that obviously your options kind of from a logistical perspective are, we want to keep all this blood that eventually expires in these disparate centers spread across the country, or is there some fast way to distribute it? And they had a company that was interested in the same question, a company called Zipline, that was using kind of a drone-based solution. So you could keep all the blood, all the different types of blood that you would need in one central location, and then distribute it on demand throughout the country. So Rwanda is a relatively small country, so you could, in a matter of minutes, load a drone and launch it, and then sort of deliver the blood necessary to a trauma center in like an order of magnitude faster than you could using any other method. Of course, the big problem was the Civil Aviation Authority there, like the laws were very antiquated and sort of in that red flag waving mode. They said, look, if we're going to approve anything to fly in our airspace, we need to see an exact prototype of it, the model of the plane and all of the safety procedures that are going to be used. And this is sort of a process that took like 4 or 5 months. And then if you changed, say your Zipline, and you have your drone 2.0, 2.1, 2.11, every change in the design necessitated a complete re-review of the whole process and another permit. And this is actually a place where, because I think the use case and the value was so clear, our team was able to work with the Zipline and the Rwandan government to go in and say, hey, what are other ways we can think about regulating drones? Obviously, the company or the forum or anyone involved, nobody wants anybody to be killed by drones. Obviously, that's not sort of where the reduction of regulation is coming from. It's just saying, can we do this in a smarter way? Can we do this in a way that recognizes the realities of rejiggering the drones. And so there was a new regulation drafted that said, okay, we're going to do safety-based regulation, that rather than sort of regulating the process, we regulate the result, the outcome. So if the product is safe, then you're good to go, and you're good to sort of iterate in this way that's more pursuant with the values of Silicon Valley, or the values of this technology company in the case. And it worked great. And actually what happened was that model for regulating, civilian or commercially owned drones in an airspace has then been sort of adapted and spread across the rest of East Africa, other parts of Africa, and even other parts of the world where, this is just a better way of doing things. So that's sort of, one hopeful example where, it no longer necessarily do you have to review every, screw in the engine compartment that you had changed by 1/4 of an inch or whatever it was. I think examples of places where, we might be going down a red flag kind of rabbit hole like the UK did all those years ago. I mean, it's kind of take your pick. I mean, I think, one thing that we sort of, that at least I think of is GDPR in Europe, and something that sort of grew out of a very, I think, the hearts of the regulators being in the right place, and there being a lot of very valid concerns about privacy, but perhaps stepping too far and saying, okay, we're going to completely shut this down. And I think when you look at other markets, and I used to work in China, in the way that companies there use data to train AI, you sort of think, oh, well, maybe is this innovation going to go elsewhere if companies in Europe in this case are not able to compete? And I think that that puts people in an interesting kind of position of trying to evaluate, okay, well, what do we really care about as regulators, and what can we allow as responsible stewards of these industries that are, I think in any reasonable estimation, the future of your European economy, or any economy, is how do we build things like AI, or how do we do robotics, or how do we train these these neural networks? We need to have policy that kind of takes that as a precondition. So I think, just to give you one example of sort of an area that is very easy to go down the red flag law and say, okay, we're only allowing data use in this very narrow and strictly provided use case, where you might just get sort of stepped over by other countries or the rest of the world that says, okay, we think about this differently, and that allows us to do all of these other things with data. So I think that's sort of another case that's relevant. In
could you talk more about some, let's say, some goals that the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution have in mind in terms of outcomes that it wants to push forward, some agendas or some industries that it's working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, one that we're really kind of keenly focused on is using Internet of Things technology in small and medium-sized enterprises in countries around the world, especially developing countries. And so I think you have a case where a lot of this sort of more automated technology exists, and then you have countries that are very dependent on manufacturing, for example, as part of their economy. But there's no sort of bridge between that technology and these industries that will need that technology to continue to be competitive into the future. And so a big part of one of our projects is finding a way to be that bridge, and whether that's through credit, or whether that's through training programs, or new legislation that makes it easier for smaller manufacturers to use IoT, robotics, automation technology. That's sort of a key piece that we're focused in on. But even more broadly, I think it's I think it's just and like I was mentioning with the agile governance piece, it's really just a way of changing the way that that governments and the private sector interact. Because I think we've seen that, in countries that get this right, I think the benefits are clear. Like, they have really dynamic and fast-growing, sectors, whether that's AI or any other. And I think that's really the key. Is like, if you get this wrong, I think on one hand or the other, it's either there's just no growth and maybe some stagnation. And on the other hand, robots kill everyone. But in the middle, if you get this right, I think the amount of investment is incredible. The amount of new jobs created, the amount of growth that's possible in the economy for these companies and for the, because I think governments at the end of the day have similar goals. I mean, if you think about sort of a government's role within a global sphere, that government is very attunely or very finely tuned. It's very attuned to the needs of its entrepreneurs, because, I mean, it knows that if those businesses don't grow, then people will not find jobs, and then those people are going to be angry and then vote that government out of power. And I think, especially for entrepreneurs who understand that linkage and can say, hey, I want to do this so that I can build a compelling business and hire people and put our country on the map when it comes to this technology. Like, that's a very powerful thing to say to a regulator, because that, I think, impacts the government's bottom line and their goals too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can really see that you and World Economic Forum represent one thing that I think Atlas Society will help you, and hopefully we work hand in hand to make this agile government happen. With Atlas Society, our goal will be to really start to develop groups of people to be more engaged politically. And those people will be millennials, majoritarily from the tech industry, to be honest. But what we can hear, it's really needed. There is this need of having a refresh and of bringing this, I will not say startup culture, but new work environment culture, lean, agile, and yeah, I think that's something that we're really aligned with. And that's so exciting to hear those words coming from you guys. So yeah, thank you for pushing for that agenda, and we'll do our best to support with our community.
John, so you talked about startups making millions and millions in new industries. You're the author of The Adaptive Economy, where you identify industries that are problematic issues in the world, and that companies that are able to innovate solutions to these problems will spawn multi-billion, trillion-dollar industries. Could you give us an overview here about industries that are ripe for disruption here? And maybe, Loren, that'll be a jumping point for you to chime in with your organization as well.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, I've just been following World Economic Forum for maybe too long. So my book is just a copy paste of a lot of the videos I've watched of World Economic Forum, and I'm just trying to make sense of that for myself and see how, as a technology entrepreneur, I can actually relate to that and implement what have been said and thought on the high level, right? So that's what my book is about. It's taking all these higher direction that are most pressing problems and issues to actually act on, and I believe through entrepreneurship and through capital investment, the private sector can actually materialize those, right? So we're talking about the most pressing issue for the century. We're talking about going to an environment and that's not like 2 degrees Celsius, right? So how do you do that? This is of course through the green energies, but also the decarbonization, massive revolution that also is creating potentially a lot of jobs. We see, I also write about the AI and the IoT industry, which is going to enable a new grid, partially the energy grid to be more efficient, but also the AI that will actually enable us to have a smarter view on our planet. Right, so there's so many applications of AI to analyze the acidification of oceans, for example, or to map out the area where the trash are polluting the ocean, right, and where you could install recycling gates. That just as an example, there's AI application to track how the population of fishes and reduce overfishing can be a good idea. In some area where the fishes are just not going to be there anymore. So yeah, AI, IoT, climate, and biosphere preservation, to me, are all going together. And I see the problems of our generation, which everyone talk about and everyone gets frightened about, like climate change or pollution in our cities. I see those as markets, because if there's a problem, there's a solution, and this solution usually can be monetized. So this is, I think, the motto of the adaptive economy, and that's the motto of Atlas, right? Creating a community of entrepreneurs, investors, and policymakers who will be supporting to preserve our civilization. Because right now, people are pretty scared about what's going to happen next decade. We see typhoons, we see, a lot of different climate events happening, from Australia, fires, to other things. And we don't know what's going to happen this year, surprising, but 2020 was pretty fucked up. And it seems like it's just the beginning of a new decade. So hence the urgency for us young millennials to work together, being an artist, a policymaker, an entrepreneur, or investors. We need to work together. And I think World Economic Forum have inspired us, and now it's time to act. So yeah, that's about the book.
Yeah, so Loren, we've so far we've talked about AI, Internet of Things, and drones, and then John mentioned climate and all these volatile weathers and storms and even pandemic. Could you talk a bit more about let's say the work at the World Economic Forum and your Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution in ensuring positive outcomes on the issues of climate change and climate resilience and climate tech?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would point folks to the website for a really comprehensive look at all the work that's being done. I think what we're really focused on in the center is, can we get the technology policy right at a foundational level? And I think that a lot of that, say, for example, I mean, John mentioned, whether that's AI or data, and we have a big project around ocean data, for example, and finding a place or developing a place where all ocean data that's collected around the world can be centralized in one place and then used, made more useful, visualized, et cetera. And that's something that can be really helpful, for one, if you're tracking ocean salinity or ocean temperature, and then, building a model on that to, better assess, whether it's a typhoon or whether that's, the increase in temperature. So I think that if you have, I think, basic, I think for a lot of these issues, it's having a sort of basic rule for cross-border data flows, for example, in this case, that can be that once I think you have that understanding, or a way to to share data and to parse it based on what its use would be. For example, there's another project called the Data for Common Purpose Initiative, which is exactly that. It's sort of, we treat data, for commercial uses in one way, but in another way, if it's used for the common good, it maybe has a different set of permissions. And so I think if you have basic rules like that, they can be applied across a huge number of these societal issues, whether that's ocean pollution or climate change or what have you. And I think the same is true of AI. I mean, these technologies ultimately are so powerful and so transformative that they will, I mean, to Joanne's point, I mean, they will have an effect on every area where they're implemented. And if those areas are sort of the big, the big flashing red warning lights that I think every government and every, even every citizen sees on their, on their dashboard or flashing in their psyche every day. I mean, those technologies will definitely be applied to those areas, because that's what, that's what entrepreneurs do. That's what the sort of economies of these countries or countries around the world, that's what drives them. And so I think just having a basic underlying rules around how we should use these technologies and how we shouldn't, makes that application across a broad array of issue areas a lot easier.
So what's your overall assessment of the situation right now in terms of ensuring positive outcomes of technologies? Are the things that you mentioned, AI, data, and all these things, in aggregate, are we seeing a use case towards solving real problems that we mentioned here in terms of climate, in terms of all these things? Or is it leaning towards abuse of privacy and all these other things, robots taking over and killing us?
Right. I mean, that's a good question. And on one hand, it's anybody's guess. I think what makes me confident that we're moving in the right direction is that, at least in the context of my own country in the US, that there are so many issues in the U.S., whether it's healthcare or the speed limit. I mean, pick your issue in the U.S. There's such a developed viewpoint on either side of that issue, and so to move it a centimeter one way or another is an incredibly pitched battle with huge resources expended on either side. And I think what's so interesting and exciting about these issues that we've been talking about today are that those the two sides, or even more than two sides in a lot of cases, are not as entrenched and making a difference or pushing that issue in one way or another towards bending it towards justice, if you will. I think is so much more attainable, or something that's sort of more it's easier to conceive of, as opposed to these issues that have defined both domestic and international politics for the past 50 or 100 years. So these issues that we're focused on now do not have all of the baggage of the generations that have come before, and that I think is really exciting, and that's why that I think I feel really rewarded for being engaged in this, and I think that the same is probably true of you too, and then the listeners too. Is this is the reason that we do this, is because we think we can make a difference. We can do something that's new and exciting, and and that makes the world a better place.
Yeah, great. Loren, it's been great having you here, sharing with your insights and what's going on at the World Economic Forum, and hearing about all these great things that you're doing to kind of bring together the governments and the private sector and align goals like that. So just to wrap up here, based on listening to you two talk, I've kind of come up with my own takeaway of how do we tackle the most pressing challenges of this decade. But let's wrap up with that question there. So if you were just going to tell someone in a paragraph at a high level, how do we tackle the most pressing challenges of this decade? And that goes to you too, John.
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
I think in order to tackle the most pressing issues of this decade and really of our generation, I think we can't do it alone. I think no matter how brilliant an entrepreneur or how powerful a government, we're at a place where these problems are so multifaceted and so woven into the fabric of the economy, of the businesses that we build, but also the institutions that govern us. We can't do it alone, and we need to bring people to the table to collaborate and co-design the rules of the road, and co-design the playing field that will define the wonderful innovations and the wonderful services and products that I think the business community and entrepreneurs around the world have to offer. And we can only do that, I think, when everybody acknowledges that their side of the coin is not the whole story. So it's not just about business, it's not just about government, it's not just about civil society organizations. I think it has to be everyone. And acknowledging, I think, where their expertise starts and ends, and coming to the table and building something that's more complete.
John, you got anything to add?
Yeah, on my side, I mean, as I mentioned before, 2020 has been a pretty interesting year in terms of the news and the state of our civilization and our planet, both politically, economically, and in terms of the state of the climate. In the news, we've seen the weirdest weather events happening. I mean, I come from south of France. I got a tornado in my hometown, like, right? And we got things like, we got really weird things happening around the world about democracy. And in the same time, we've been reaching a global pandemic, which is the biggest event our generation have seen in terms of economic downturn and fear. Before that, the last one was really the Second World War, right? So while all of this is happening outside, most of us and most of the best people I know, including myself, often just spend 5 hours per day just looking at social media, Netflix, YouTube, or playing video game. And it's just I'm looking away. I'm just trying to forget all the weird stuff that's happening outside. And we are just looking away. All of my smartest friends, they're looking at crypto, hyper trading. They're looking at the number of their followers in their million Instagram accounts, sharing picture of themselves. We're just looking away, and this makes us feel awful, depressed, and lost. So I think, as Loren said, we need to ally, we need to collaborate, and we can. I think for the first time in the history, we had a global collaboration happening through the global pandemic, right? If you look at the history of humanity, it's the first time that there is a real global collaboration that really have happened to face a global threat, which was not alien, right? So we got lucky. We haven't got the aliens. We just got a virus, right? And we somehow managed to keep it okay, right? So I think this proves us that when we want to, we can act on a global level and mobilize all the parts of our society, from the young to the active workers to the eldest, to react to a global threat. And I believe, as Loren mentioned, the next global threat is going to be the climate change and the climate resilience. And also we have all the powers which our ancestors will never have dreamed of. We're magic superpower rangers, basically. We have like AI, we have like spaceships, we have all these crazy technologies. And it's just about how do our generation are going to be able to use them to solve these problems, right? And I really strongly believe it's not our parents. They are tired, they're done. They're just trying their best. It's not our grandparents. It's not our little brother or sisters. It's really us. It's really the people who are 25 to 45, 50 now. These are the generation who can act, and I think we're gonna be able to do it. I'm really positive. I'm seeing incredible societal movements emerging around the world to protect our planet and to use technology for really doing better. So I'm really confident this is happening, and that's why today, with the rise of this around the world, we want to also help catalyze that through Atlas Society, and it's going to be very exciting. I think it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah. So just to summarize my takeaway from listening to you two, as just as an audience here, my takeaway is that to tackle these giant, most pressing issues of the decade, Loren, you mentioned how in order to ensure a positive outcome, all the stakeholders need to come together and align and be in the same room and have a dialogue and have their viewpoints heard. And then we talk these through and then figure out how we can collaborate. And that makes the role of your organization at the WEF and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution very important, because you act as the platform for these dialogues to happen. You act as the facilitator, the mediator between all these parties that may have very opposing views towards each other, or animosities or prejudices. So that's a really important thing here. And with John, with Atlas Society, you touched upon the point of how we have so much potential as human beings. We have access to all this technology, all these spaceships and all these innovations, but we're using it to suggest playlists on Spotify and the next Netflix show to binge watch, and we're just shutting off from all the problems. And that's really the mission statement of Atlas Capital, is to mobilize people, is to get people inspired and show them a blueprint, an atlas of how to actually, solve these problems that are depressing you. So both Atlas and both the World Economic Forums are really important platforms to mobilize innovation and mobilize human brains in this world towards the right direction. So thank you two for sharing your insights here on how to tackle the most pressing problems in the world. Just before I let you go, Loren, could you tell us about just slightly what to expect next from the World Economic Forum and how to learn more about what you're doing here at the Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of different ways to get involved. I mean, one, I think particularly salient way is there's a young global there's a young global leader, a YGL group, and a global shaper group that I think is sort of tailored to especially younger people focused on levers of change. And I would encourage people to check those out online. I mean, those are ways that, whether it's a local, domestic, or international issue, and especially around issues like climate change, there are a lot of ways to get involved there. And I would just encourage people to check that out.
Okay, great. Well, Loren, thank you so much for joining us and sharing what's going on here at the World Economic Forum here. And we will look forward to hear more about what the exciting things that you guys are working on. John, you have anything to add as a signing off message?
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Loren. Hopefully see you soon.
John, thank you both so much, and happy birthday again.
Yeah, thank you.